5 things to do with leftover pizza dough. I always make extra dough because it's basically the same amount of work to make 4 portions as it is to make 1. The things I'm going to show you could work with any dough recipe. My standard one is in the description, and the only unusual thing about it is I like to knead it up, portion it into individual oiled containers, and put it straight into the fridge. I let it cold ferment for many days, maybe a week, and here's how it comes out. I usually go around the edge, gently pulling it away from the glass. I want to lift it out while deflating it as little as possible. And perhaps the most obvious thing to do with leftover pizza dough is make garlic knots. You take your dough, try to get it into a reasonably even rectangle, and then slice that into strips. There's a million ways to tie these, but you can simply take a strip, cross the ends over, send one up the middle, and you've got a garlic knot. I once saw this young lady making these at a restaurant, and she did this rad move where she'd pick up the strip, wrap it around 2 fingers twice, and then send the excess through. She did like one every second that way. I'm not sure I did that right. If you're feeling really unconfident, you can totally just do this down on the board, cross 2 ends over, send one end through. And what to do with the other end? Well, you could just leave it dangling out. It would cook darker and crispier than the rest, which would be a nice texture contrast. Or if you're not into that, you could simply tuck it under. Oh, we should probably place these directly onto our baking sheet as we shape them. That's just some parchment paper I have on there, not necessary. Now, these are looking pretty big. They're going to double in size. Make yours as big as you want, but I think I want little knots. I'm going to start cutting these strips in half before I tie them. If the dough is sticking to you really bad, you could lubricate your hands with water, flour, or oil, depending on what kind of finish you want on your little breadlets. I want a crispy brown crust, so I'm going to work these with oil on my hands. That's what oil will do to the surface in the oven. I'm going to need 2 trays, so I might as well put the big ones together and the little ones together. That way the big ones can bake a little longer. I'll proof those for about a half hour. That is, give the yeast time to raise them one last time in their final form. That'll help them bake up a little airier, and I don't think they need to be covered. That coating of oil should form a water-safe barrier to keep them from drying out over that time. Garlic knots are coated in a heavily seasoned oil or butter. Some people brush that on before they go in the oven, but I think that just gets you a seasoned dinner roll. I'm going to bake these dry at 400 Fahrenheit, 200 C for probably 20 minutes. That's plenty of time to peel and chop like half a head of garlic and a big fistful of fresh parsley. A stick of butter goes into that little saucepan. I prefer to make this with olive oil, but my wife prefers butter, so we're doing butter. I'll melt that on like medium-high heat, scrape in the garlic, and then just turn the heat off. It does not have to cook very much, and you certainly don't want to burn it. In goes a bunch of whatever other seasonings you want. I'll do pepper, a pinch of chili flakes, some dried oregano, not yet with the fresh parsley. I'll give that a taste. You might think that it needs salt, especially if you used unsalted butter, but I say hold off on the salt for now. Okay, some people bake these until they're just set, but still kind of pale. That will get you nice soft garlic knots. I prefer to bake them until they're getting quite brown like that. They might seem too hard at this stage, and they are, but they're not going to stay that way. In these go to a bowl, ideally while still warm, and I'll pour in much of my seasoned butter. I'll hold back a little just in case they don't need it. Then just stir and stir for a minute. Give them time to absorb that stuff. I'll grate in some cheese. I do this now so it doesn't get too hot and go grainy. Likewise, I'll put in parsley after things have cooled down a little bit to keep it green, and there you go. Between the cheese and the salted butter I used, those are almost salty enough, but I'll hit them with some more. The butter will make the salt stick. Garlic knots are classically an appetizer, and if you start with breadlets that are baked a little too hard, they won't go mushy as they sit around soaking in the butter or oil as people peck on them before dinner. You know what's also great to have before dinner? An aperitif from House, the sponsor of this video. House is this really exciting farm-to-glass aperitif maker in California. It's a family business. Let's see what flavors I got. Citrus flower, that was my favorite last time. Ooh, ginger yuzu. Aperitifs aren't super common here in the U.S. It's something you traditionally drink as you're hanging out with your friends waiting for dinner to be served. It's relatively low alcohol and flavored to excite the palate. Yum. Great brandy from Sonoma County, raw sugar, orange peel, lemongrass, yuzu from California. Just super refreshing and creative, that is. You can make cocktails with them, whatever. Will the Asian flavors in this particular one clash with something like garlic knots? No, those are like long-lost cousins reunited. But House is an anytime drink. I don't always have it before dinner. It's just a lovely thing to sip on whenever. The first 100 of you can get $10 off and free shipping on your House Essentials kit. Just hit my link in the description and use my code AdamRagusea2. Thank you, House. Okay, second thing to do with leftover pizza dough. It's way simpler. Something my dad used to do when I was growing up. Just lay out the dough as before and cut it into little rectangles. Specific dimensions are up to you. Just remember they'll probably double in size. When you cut them, pull them away from each other so they don't merge back into each other like that. And you don't have to do rectangles. Let's try rolling some into balls. Again, I'll let those proof for 20 or 30 minutes. Nice and puffy now. Okay, wide pan, and in goes at most a ½ inch of olive oil, a centimeter. And heat it to medium at most. These need really gentle frying. not that gentle. I want to see some fizzing when it goes in. Plop them all down, flip when the first side is just golden, and really the trick here is to not burn them. See that one? That's too dark. That'll taste burnt. Really gentle heat. If you can turn them up on their sides and fry the sides, go for it, but I kind of like the pale sides. Heterogeneity. And when they're golden and they don't seem to be puffing up anymore, I'd basically cook them another minute just to make sure the inside is done and pull them out to paper towels. You could sprinkle some salt on them right now while they're still sticky, but my dough is already pretty well seasoned. Give one of those a taste. Those were dinner rolls in my house growing up. They taste strongly of the extra virgin olive oil, which is delicious. A little crispy, a little chewy. Always looked forward to those when I was a kid. And here's another thing my dad would do. In with the little spherical ones, they're not donut holes. Don't bother trying to get even color on them all the way around. Some paper towels into a bowl this time, and you can see I let a couple of those get too dark while I was moving the camera. Then cinnamon sugar. It's usually about 5 parts sugar to 1 part cinnamon. Dump on a lot of it. It's the only source of sugar in this dessert. Shake those up a little bit. My dad used to do this in a paper lunch bag to wick away oil. And if you think olive oil has no place in desserts, think again, my friend. That is a phenomenal flavor combination. Way more sophisticated than a donut and not too sweet. Okay, third thing to do with leftover pizza dough, make pizza bread. I have a whole video about this in the description, but it's just a cute name my kids gave to this very simple thing. Works best with a dough that you've aged in the fridge for like a week. You take your dough out and turn it around. The underside has a rougher, more bubbly surface. You wipe it down with some olive oil and you put on whatever seasonings you want. I do black pepper, garlic powder, and some very big crunchy salt. My oven has been preheating on maximum for about a half hour, and I'll just plop this down onto my pizza steel. A stone works too. I wouldn't try to shimmy this on with a peel. The olive oil would make it stick. I just drop it on. That takes 7 minutes. If the top is not browning, you might need to turn on the broiler midway. That's just the heat from above the grill. Don't burn the garlic powder though. It burns easy. I often need a metal tool to scrape that up off the steel. Look at the bottom. If you just try to bake this on a baking sheet or something, you won't get that crispy base. And if you've seen me bake this bread before, you might be thinking, hey, that looks a little different on top. Yes, it does, because I got a new oven, and it's just amazing the extent to which every oven is different. Look at that glassy, crispy top on that. Just a shockingly good, simple thing that never fails to please the kids or adults. Fourth thing you can do with leftover dough, freeze it. Pizza dough freezes amazingly well. Just freeze it after it is fully risen, when it's ready to bake. I could just transfer that glass container straight to the freezer. The dough is full of air, so it's not like straight water that expands when it freezes and breaks glass containers. But this does work better if you pull it out and wrap it in plastic wrap or put it in a freezer bag. If the dough is spread out nice and flat, it will freeze quickly and it will thaw quickly. It's flat and it's full of air bubbles, so it'll thaw on the counter in like 30 or 40 minutes. 20 minutes if you put it on aluminum, which is extremely thermally conductive. Just flip it halfway when you can feel that side touching the metal is soft. 20 minutes later, it's ready. Now, has freezing killed the yeast in there? Some of them probably, and that might be a problem if we were making a bread that needs to proof up really big and puffy right before baking. But with a flat bread like pizza, every single yeast could be dead in there and it wouldn't matter as long as we let the dough rise before we freeze it. And what kind of pizza are we making now? Well, this is idea number 5. Use your leftover dough to experiment with something new. In this case, Lauren's been wanting to try this Smitten Kitchen recipe she saw for a summer squash pizza. It's linked in the description. If you go through all the work to make dough and you let it ferment, possibly for days, you're going to be really bummed if you try some weird new pizza that you've never made before and it sucks. So I say do all your experimenting with your extra dough, especially when you're not particularly hungry. Then you can't lose. This is just a couple of grated squash into which she's put like a teaspoon of salt. Witness the power of osmosis. She'll squeeze all the moisture she can out of that and discard, then mix in like 4 or 5 ounces of Gruyere, maybe 120 grams. We both thought this recipe looked promising, but we were worried the flavors would be a little bland. It does call for Gruyere, which is certainly stronger than mozzarella, so we're thinking that might compensate for the lack of any strong sauce. We had an instinct to use garlic, but we figured we'd follow the recipe, which also calls for scattering some breadcrumbs on the top before baking. We're using panko. Those should brown and make a nice textural contrast. My pizza steel has been preheating on max temperature for like an hour, and I turned on the broiler halfway through to brown the top. Looks pretty nice, that. By the way, can you tell this dough was frozen? Neither can I. It's still puffed up great around the rim. Nice and crispy, nice brown bottom. That Smitten Kitchen recipe really is delicious, though we do both think it needs garlic. And we're not mad because we're just experimenting with our extra doughs. We already had normal pizza last night. We can't lose. And you can't lose if you pre-order Lauren's latest novel. It's kind of a cheesy love story. Link in the description. Hashtag kind of an ad because we're married, but Lauren's not the sponsor of this video. House is, and their farm-to-glass aperitifs are just as good with dinner as they are before dinner. Get free shipping and $10 off with my link and code in the description, along with my dough recipe. Go make some dough. Way more than you need.